talking about failure. Powerful, strong, emotive word. And I was thinking about calling this message Redeeming Failure, or failure is your greatest opportunity, and spinning it that way. I'm just calling it Dealing with Failure. It's something that we all have dealt with or are dealing with at some point in our lives. And in the population of soldiers that I work with, recruiters, I think it's extra significant. As a matter of fact, I've been here for a little bit, and one of the top conversations, most often had conversations that I have with soldiers, it goes like this: Chap, wherever I was before in the Army, I was successful. I was the golden child. I was the one that they looked to get something done, and I just experienced nothing but success in my Army career. And now that I'm here as a recruiter, I just can't get out of the chute. I can't get going. I can't seem to produce. I'm failing. And they're struggling with that. They don't know what to do with it because they've never felt it before. And it can become a very powerful and consuming thing that can be contagious and can leak over into other parts of their lives. And failure has that effect on us. It just can seem like the dead end. The end of a career, the end of a relationship, and a lot of times the end of a life. And I want to talk about dealing with failure. And I want to use two examples from the Bible. One this week, one next week. Next week we're going to look at Moses and how Moses, as successful as he was, failure is woven into the fabric of his life. This week I want to look at Peter, and it's much the same story. Peter ended up a very successful church leader, wrote a lot of the New Testament. We look at him as the first pope, if you will, the founder, leader of the church. But failure is just right there smack dab in the middle of his story. And so you got this kind of storyline of success, deep failure, and then redemption, and then success. And so I want to tell that story and then kind of point out some observations that we have along the way. But first, just Peter, the Apostle Peter, church leader Peter. I'm going to say two things. I'm going to say, number one, Peter's worst moment at the same time was his greatest moment. Number two is this right here, that God can only fill an empty cup. So as we think about those two things, let us proceed with the story of Peter. And Peter, I think, as you look at how he's characterized in the Bible, typical Army recruiter. Successful, competent, natural leader. If there was this void of leadership, among the apostles, the disciples of Jesus, Peter was the one that took charge. Peter was the one that filled it. He was comfortable in that role. And you see him as he was a fisherman, so you can guess that he was kind of strong and, successful. He had his own boat, he had his own house, he kind of took care of his household. You often see him as being outspoken and unafraid, and leaning on his competence, leaning on his skills. He was also kind of the guy that sometimes would put his foot in his mouth. In other words, he kind of, acted before thinking. He was the guy that Jesus said, I'm going to go to the cross. He told his disciples that, and Peter was the one who said, no, you're not. I'm not going to let you. I will defend you to the end. And, it's this idea that I am capable enough to do all of these different things. So I look at Peter as a man who was competent, who was confident, whose cup was full. This kind of command man, if you will, this kind of alpha male, if you will, this person who would look in the mirror, and not in an unhealthy kind of prideful way, and say, you know what, I like what I see. I 300 on the PT test. Everywhere I go, I'm successful. I'm doing pretty well. So that was Peter's backstory, if you will. Okay? A life of success. Wherever he went, everything he touched turned to gold. People looked to him as the leader. And then we see in the end of the gospel, particularly we're going to look at Luke, Peter runs into the wall he couldn't climb. He runs into failure. Deep, bitter, painful, blatant failure. And that's the thing about recruiters, is that, their failure is so blatant. And so, if you didn't produce the numbers this month, if you didn't produce the numbers last month, that's failure. You didn't do it. It's just cut and dry. There's no hiding behind it. And that's the kind of failure that Peter put himself through as well at the end of the Gospel of Luke. So kind of the backstory is this, is that Jesus had been arrested and was going to start his little trial, sham trial, and was going to end up at the cross. And before this, Peter was like, no, I'm going to defend you to the end. Nobody's going to get to you. I will protect you. You know, all of these different kind of things that Peter said in his own strength and his own ability he was going to do. Well, Jesus was arrested. And then Peter was exposed, if you will, after that. Because Peter followed from a distance as Jesus was being led away, and people were like, you were with Jesus, you were with Jesus. And Peter was like, no, I'm not, I wasn't with Jesus. Completely denied him. Completely denied that he knew him. You know, so, you know, a week ago he was like, I'll be with you to the end. Now he's like running, you know, with his tail between his legs because he's afraid. He's afraid of what's going to happen to him if he gets identified as a follower of Jesus. And so Jesus and him lock eyes as Jesus is being kind of led away, already starting to get beat up by the guards and being prepared for his death on the cross. Jesus locks eyes with Peter, and at that moment Peter realizes, you know, his failure. At that moment Peter realizes, you know, all those voices of him saying, I'm going to protect you and I'll be there for you, kind of stop dead in his tracks as he says, I don't know him. And then in Luke chapter 22, verse 62, after this moment where Jesus and Peter lock eyes, and I think Peter begins to realize he failed, the Bible says in Luke chapter 22, verse 62, Peter left the courtyard crying bitterly. Peter left the courtyard crying bitterly. And for the first time, I believe, in his life, he was crushed by personal failure. He did not perform as he thought he would. He let Jesus down. He let God down. He let his disciples down. He let himself down, his family down. You know, everything he banked upon in regards to his own ability and his own confidence was ripped out from him. This was, you could arguably, the worst moment in his life. But at the same time, it was the moment where Peter's cup was emptied. And remember what I said, that God can only fill an empty cup. And if your cup is full of your own ability and of your own competence, God can't fill it. In this moment, Peter's cup was emptied. Compare what Peter was thinking to what God was thinking at this moment of time. The moment in time where Peter was weeping bitterly, what was going through his head? Well, what goes through your head when you're dealing with failure? I'm a loser. I'm worthless. It's over. This is the end. I'm a failure. I believe Peter was thinking those things as he was weeping bitterly. That's Peter's perspective. But I also believe at the very same time as Peter was dealing with this failure, God was saying something completely different. As Peter was saying, I'm a loser, listen to this, God was saying, finally. The very moment Peter was saying it's over, God was saying, finally, he's ready for me to fill him. Finally, his eyes are off the mirror, and now they have nothing else to look at but me for help and hope. Finally, he's no longer full of himself, but he's given me an opportunity to fill him. At the same time Peter was saying, it is over, it is done, God was saying, finally, now I can use this guy. The same exact time. You know, at the very same moment Peter saw himself as a failure and this was the end, God saw it as the beginning. The beginning. You know, I look at a wild bronco. Wild bronco roaming the prairie, strong, beautiful, graceful. And the farmer looks at the bronco and has this vision that the bronco can be the strongest, most used animal on his farm. But at that same moment, the bronco is wild. And the bronco can't be used. Unpredictable, insecure, will just do whatever it wants. The bronco is untamed. And in order for the bronco to be that tool, that instrument that the farmer can use, what needs to happen to that bronco? In order for that bronco to be the most utilized tool on the farm, the bronco needs to be broken. Now think about that moment that the bronco is broken. Think about what might be going through, I know it's weird, think about that, what might be going through the Bronco's head at that moment. The moment when it's broken. I have lost. It is over. My life as I know it is over. And the Bronco's head is hung low and does not know if there is a future. You know, everything that he believed in is now completely gone. He's broken. At that moment, the Bronco says it's over. What is the farmer saying? The farmer is saying, now I can use this Bronco. Now this beautiful, graceful, powerful animal is useful to me. Not just useful, but the most useful tool that I have on my farm. The Bronco sees it as an end, but the farmer sees it as a beginning. And you can compare the life of Peter before this event where he wept bitterly and after this event. And before this event, he was an unstable, unpredictable, gifted, competent person, but you couldn't rely on him as a leader. So many times he got himself, he got everybody in trouble. But after this, he was a competent, humble, secure leader that the church could lean on, and he led the church out of its infancy. So much more effective. This very same moment where Peter thought it was over, it was actually the beginning for Peter. This moment of epic failure turned out to be a hinge point in his life. When he thought it was over, it was actually just the beginning. His worst moment became his greatest moment. God can only fill an empty cup. And when Peter's cup was emptied, at that moment, God began to fill it. So I want to talk about what Peter might have learned throughout this whole process and what we might learn when we're talking about failure. 5 quick things. Number 1, through failure we realize we are human. And we are weak in some point in our lives. Success can blind us to our own weakness and we think we can overcome or do anything. Failure confronts us with it. Hey, I'm vulnerable. I might need help. I can't do everything. That's number 1. We realize we're human. Failure also instills in us this idea of let go and let God. Trust God to open doors. Trust God to provide. Trust God to do the things that we might not be able to do ourselves. Rely on God. A lot of times throughout our success, we want to control everything. And failure forces us to be in a position where we realize we don't control everything. We can't control everything. I do need to trust and lean on God. Number 3, failure teaches us that what looks like the end isn't the end. For Peter, for the Bronco when it was broken, what looked like the end? It was over. I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm out of the army. My career is over. I'm a failure. You know, I can't see what's around the corner, but it's not good. You know, I'm out. God sees what's around the corner. You know, God had plans for Peter even after this failure. The farmer has plans for the Bronco even after it was broken. God has plans for you even though you might be wrestling with failure right now. You can't see what's around the corner, but God can. Number 4, my value as a person is not based on my performance. So important. My value as a person is not based on my performance. I am not a failure even if I failed. I am not a loser if I didn't make numbers. I am not a bad person based upon this. My value as a person is not based upon my performance, but it's based upon the fact that at least I believe that I was created in God's image. And that means that every person has inherent worth and dignity and value that is completely separated from their performance. And that needs to be the ground of our being, not what we did in our last at-bat, or not when we did when the football was last thrown to us, or not the numbers that we had last month. No, my value as a person is not how many hits I get on this video message. It's unrelated. My value as a person is based upon my inherent worth because I carry the image of God. Now, number 5. Failure teaches us the incredible significance of grace. Grace defined is simply getting what you don't deserve. That's what grace is. And when we don't need grace when we succeed, but we do need grace when we fail. And grace comes from God. He gives us what we don't deserve. He accepts us despite our failure. He gives us a future even if we don't deserve it. And you can call grace hope. You can call it redemption. You can call it forgiveness. And the threefold pattern is this, and I'm ending here. God gives grace. We receive grace. We can give grace to ourselves. And I have found that the person who sees failure as an end is unable to give grace to themselves, is unable to forgive themselves, and is unable to accept themselves despite their failure. God's the one who gives us grace. We receive it. And I think when we receive it, we can give it to ourselves and then maybe even to others. So 5 things that we learn from failure. We realize we're human. We let go and let God. What looks like the end isn't the end. Our value as a person is not based on our performance, and the incredible significance of grace. God loves you. Have the best day possible and walk in peace.